All right. Hello again. We're going to do third question from 2018. This one involves an interface, something called a string checker. And let's see what they describe a string checker is. So a string checker just simply has a Boolean is valid method. You give it a string and it'll figure out if it's valid. We don't really know what is valid means, but classes that implement string checker will tell us what to do there. Okay, so they can all do it differently, right? That's polymorphism. So when we write this class, we're going to say that public class code word checker implements string checker, okay, keyword for an interface. And it turns out that a code word checker has an overloaded constructor. I think this is the only example I've seen on a College Board test where you have to write an overloaded constructor. So what does that mean? That means we're going to have two different ways that we can create a code word checker. Okay, you can give a code word checker two ints, which show lengths, like a minimum and a maximum length, and a third parameter that's a string that must not occur. Okay, so to be considered a code word checker, it'll have to be between the minimum and maximum inclusive and not contain a certain string. All right. There's another way to create a code word checker. It still has the string that you cannot contain, okay, to be considered a code word checker. But if the user doesn't specify what the lengths are, then they default to 6 and 20. So it still has the same state where it has two ints that belong to it and a string, but we just know the values will become 6 and 20. All right, when we write that constructor, both times we'll say public code word checker. It's just we'll change the parameter fields, and that's how you create the overload. And then that's how on the user end, we could figure out where it's going to. So 3 instance fields, 2 ints and a string, and then there's some sample code here, just showing you like here's some sample calls of the is valid method. Remember, is valid only gets handed a string. So you'll have to compare the user's string length to whatever your two fields turn out to be for min and max. Any violation would result in false. And then we'll do an you don't really want to think like an equals method because it doesn't have to match length. This is a better case for us to use index of. So if if it can't contain a dollar sign, then we're only looking for like the presence of that one character. So index of, if it comes back as -1, then we're in the clear. If it doesn't come back as -1, then that's going to be bad for us, right? Because we don't want it to be contained within the string. All right, so we're writing the entire class, and it did mention that we're implementing an interface. So instead of just saying public class code word checker, we have to go a little bit further and say implements string checker. All right, and to be a string checker, it's going to need a Boolean method called is valid that's handed a string. All right, for the state of our object, we saw two private ints. One was a minimum length and one was a maximum length. Okay, and there's a private string. I don't know it can't contain this string, so this is like what we don't want to see. I don't know, maybe just call it check. Okay, and then our constructor, and again, this was a little bit unique, I believe, of other free response questions, is that there's actually two different constructor paths here. And so we have code word checker that's going to accept an int followed by another int followed by a string that is like our check string. Okay, so we would initialize min with A, we'd initialize max with B, and then our check string picks up C. And then we have our second constructor, which is going to look very, very similar. Okay, it's still going to say public code word checker, but it's only going to be handed a string. And in this one, we're going to default min to 6. Okay, we're going to default max to 20. And then we're going to initialize check with the user specified string, which I called C. And there's only one method to write here. Okay, it's a Boolean method. It's called is valid, and it's always going to be handed one string. this string is going to be compared to the check string. So I don't know, maybe you call it like, I don't know, entry. Okay, so maybe or you could call it like a password or whatever. It's kind of what this feels like to me. So I need that entry to pass 3 tests to get true, right? I need entry's length, okay, to be at least the min, right? Simultaneously, I need entry's length to be no more than max, okay? And then the third check I need is that if I were to take entry and go across all of its characters, which is exactly what index of does, and I start looking for the check string. Remember, the check string might be a $sign. It might be a 3-letter sequence too. And I don't want to see it in there. So I actually want it to equal -1. So for me to come back true, I don't want to see that check string in there. And there were no other methods mentioned here, so it's just got one method. And if you remember, like the examples that they showed us, I remember seeing like a true followed by 3 falses, and then same thing here, we see a true followed by 3 falses. These are the returns that my method is showing us here, and they're matching the same examples that we see here. So it looks like it's working perfectly, and should be happy with it. Notice that I didn't bother like writing a loop or anything. I don't think you'd be penalized for writing a loop here, but maybe because this is an available method to us, it's part of our class, like we should be able to use index of appropriately.